Hello everybody and welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be doing some cooking and canning, and I'm pretty excited because this is going to be a new recipe that I haven't tried before, and I'm going to be preserving up a lot of our homegrown onions. So if you watched in our last video, at the end we were cleaning up some of our homegrown onions, just trimming off the stalks and the root end, and this year I did have some of my onions start flowering before we harvested them, and this means that those onions will not keep very well in the pantry. Once the flower stalk starts forming, there will be kind of like a hollow center to the onion that will get softer and eventually rot out. So I knew I wanted to preserve those onions while they're still pretty fresh. So that's what I'm going to be doing today and trying out this new recipe. And the recipe is going to be like a caramelized onion jam that is kind of sweet, but it also has balsamic vinegar in it. This is going to be a water bath canning project. So the balsamic vinegar helps for it to be acidic, since onions are a naturally low acid food. You normally wouldn't be able to water bath can it, you'd have to pressure can it. But since I don't have a pressure canner, I wanted to find a recipe that I could water bath can with, and this is what I found. So here are some of the onions that I'm working with. I am mostly working with yellow onions. I do have a few of my white onions, but most of them are a yellow onion. That should be pretty sweet when they're cooked down. But I also threw in some of my white onions just because I know those ones don't keep as well either. So I wanted to just add in a little bit of a mix. And I'm using a recipe that calls for 4 pounds of onions, but I am going to be doing 1.5 times the recipe, just because the original one said it only made like 3 to 4 half pints, and I don't really want to run like a batch in the water canner for just a few jars. So hopefully if I 1.5 it, that will be enough for me to have like a full pot in my water bath canner. So yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. I think the recipe is going to be really delicious. It sounds really good because you have the tartness and the flavor from the balsamic vinegar. Of course, we're going to be caramelizing the onions as well, so that's going to add a lot of deep flavor and sweetness. And then there's also a good amount of sugar in this recipe, so hopefully it's not too sweet, but I think the sugar will help to balance out the balsamic vinegar and make sure it's not too vinegary. I'll link the recipe that I found in the description box if you want to check it out. But basically the ingredients I'm going to be using once I have 1.5 times the batch is 6 pounds of sliced onions, 6 tablespoons of olive oil. I think I'm actually going to use butter instead of olive oil. 2¼ cups of sugar, 2¼ cups of balsamic vinegar, 3 tablespoons of thyme and rosemary, just like a mix of those two, 3 teaspoons of salt, and 1.5 teaspoons of pepper. So it's a pretty simple ingredient list. And the first thing I have to do is slice up all of these onions, which I'm not really that excited about because I do tend to cry when I cut up onions. So when I know I'm cutting up a lot of onions, what I do is I bring out these goggles. These are actually my soap making goggles, but around here they're also known as my onion cutting goggles. And these are not fully airtight. I think the best thing would be to have like swimming goggles or something like that, but these kind of have like ventilation holes in them. And since I'm cutting a lot of onions today, I think what I'm going to do is tape over those holes and just try and make it so that none of the onion tear gases get into my eyes while I'm cutting. So I'm going to do that now, and this is really going to be a fashion statement, a look, a vibe. It's going to be interesting. All right, so here we go. All right, how is that? I think it needs to be a little tighter, and I'm definitely gonna have marks on my face after this, so really looking forward to that. What do you think? Ready to start my job as a fashion influencer? Alright, so let's get cutting. Hopefully we are all protected, and hopefully the glare from the goggles is not too annoying. Actually, before I get started, I'm going to go ahead and I have my Dutch oven on the stove behind me, and I'm going to go ahead and get the 6 tablespoons of butter in there and get that melting. And I think what I'm going to do is, at least for the first few onions, as soon as I've sliced them, I'm going to go ahead and put them in the pot so they can start like kind of sweating out and getting a little bit of color, because once this is all sliced, it's going to be a lot of volume in the pot and the onions are going to sweat a lot. But I also want to make sure that I'm keeping track of how many pounds I'm putting in there. So yeah, I'm gonna slice an onion or two and weigh it out and make sure I like keep track of how much I've put in there. All right, so 6 tablespoons of butter. All right, so I just want to show you, I've cut into this onion, and in the center here, you see how there's like this darker ring in here? That was the flower stalk starting to form, and you can see how that would kind of like start rotting out before the rest of the onion. So it's nice to get to it earlier, and I'm just going to cut that part out, but the rest of the onion is still usable and beautiful. We are making sure we're preserving these onions before they start turning. Also, any of these onion scraps that are like pretty nice and clean and don't have dirt on them, I'm gonna put them in a bowl. And these are gonna go into a bag that I keep in the freezer for when I make like vegetable or chicken broth, because those can add a lot of flavor. And I'm slicing these pretty thinly, maybe like 1/4 of an inch. We really did have a pretty good onion year this year, so I'm pretty happy about that. And I did plant out a ton of onions this year. I think it was definitely in the hundreds. Not all of them grew, some of them definitely died after I transplanted them, but I think we got a pretty good number of onions in total, and we've already eaten a ton of them. So I'm really happy with it this year. And we really go through a lot of onions, so we'll just see how far into the winter they'll be able to keep and how quickly we use them up. But that's definitely one thing that has been a good year in the garden, so I'm very happy about that. And they really didn't take up that much space either. I think I had like a maybe 4-foot by 8-foot area, and I was able to pack in hundreds and hundreds of onions, maybe like 400 or 500. And then we also had our leeks and shallots as well, so in total lots of alliums. All right, so I'm gonna weigh my 2 onions so far. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put in 1/2 pound. All right, and we just keep slicing. I feel like I can feel it in the air already, that like the air is spicy, even though it's like not really getting to my eyes yet. I feel like I can like smell the spiciness. So yeah, I hope it doesn't go through the goggles. I'm very scared. I actually have a pretty funny story about slicing onions. So I've been making a lot of recipes where I use an onion and then also maybe like a spicy pepper. And you can probably see sort of where this is going, but basically when I'm cooking things like smashed cucumbers or shakshuka, when I want to put in a spicy pepper, what I've done a few times is I slice up the spicy pepper first, and then I will start slicing up my onion. And like I said, I always cry when I'm slicing up onions, and what will happen is, in addition to like tearing up, my nose also starts running from the onion. So after cutting the pepper and the onion, I'll go and like get a tissue because my nose is running, and I'll wipe my nose. And then maybe like 5 minutes later, I started feeling like this tingly sensation right under my nose, like kind of in the middle where I had wiped. And there was one time it got so bad. It was like tingly but also painful because I apparently had gotten like the oils from the chili pepper onto the tissue, even though I washed my hands, and it like got all onto my nose and was like burning my nose. And it was just the like weirdest sensation, because usually when I'm affected by chili peppers, it's like on my hands, because I usually don't wear gloves if I'm just cutting up one pepper, because it just seems like a lot of work and a waste of a glove to cut up one pepper, so I usually just deal with it. But I've never had that sensation like right under my nose, and it was so weird and so uncomfortable. And usually what helps me when I get like chili pepper oils, this one had a really thick flour stalk in there. So yeah, usually when I get like chili pepper oils, one thing that helps to kind of like relieve that tingly sensation is putting something cold. So sometimes I'll like soak my hands in cold water just to kind of help dull the sensation a little bit. So when my nose started tingling, I like had a fan running and I like stuck my face in front of the fan to try and like get that breeze and that cool sensation, but it wasn't really working. So what I ended up doing was I took an ice cube and I just like held it underneath my nose, and of course it's like melting because it's like touching my face, and I'm like breathing my like warm breath onto this ice cube, and it's just like dripping down my face, but it was the only thing that made it feel better. I went through an entire ice cube just relieving this like spicy sensation on my nose. All right, quick break to stir the pot. Okay, and just for context, we don't have like small ice cubes here. We use like these big, massive jumbo ice cubes. And I went through an entire one of these like huge ice cubes just holding it underneath my nose. But honestly, it really did help a lot. So if you ever find yourself in a situation like that, just stick an ice cube under your nose. By the time it's gone, hopefully the sensation will have passed. But really, you should probably just learn from this and do not cut spicy peppers like right before or after you're cutting onions, because it does not end well. It's not always a problem because the peppers I used are not supposed to be that spicy, but I feel like I've just had a couple that were like extra spicy. So yeah, that was not really a fun experience, and I'd like to say that I learned from it the first time, but I'll be honest, it happened again like a week later. It wasn't as bad, thankfully. I think the pepper wasn't as spicy, but it definitely did happen again. I didn't have to use an ice cube that time, but I was like just trying to wash underneath my nose with cold water under the faucet. It's like such a weird area because like you can't really like stick your nose under the water like I can with my hands. So it was just really weird. But so far the onion goggles seem to be working really well, so that's definitely good. It feels good to be canning today. I have not done a lot of canning this year, which I feel like at first I was like feeling really bad about it, but I've been trying to like talk myself into not really stressing over it because it's really not that big a deal. I'm like putting unnecessary pressure on myself, trying to live up to this idea of growing all of our food and like preserving all of our food when, yeah, it's nice, but it's also not really necessary, and I don't have to like, beat myself up if we end up having to buy groceries in the winter. Like, it's fine. All right, we've got another pound of onions going in. And at this point, I'm also going to add in some of the salt, because the salt will help to draw out moisture from the onions. Here's a look at what's going on in the pot right now. So yeah, I haven't done much canning yet. The only thing I've canned so far is the batch of tomatoes that I showed in, I think it was 2 videos ago. I did tomato sauce and diced tomatoes, and I didn't even do that much, and I don't know how many more tomatoes we're gonna get at this point. I feel like a lot of the tomatoes are starting to die, so maybe I won't be able to can as many tomatoes as I would have liked. Every year I tell myself I need to grow more tomatoes because you really need so many tomatoes to make like tomato sauce because they boil down so much. And every year I just don't grow enough tomatoes. I need to like double it every year until I can can lots and lots of them because they're the thing we go through most. And they're also like so easy to can because you don't really need a lot of ingredients. You just like either dice up the tomatoes or you reduce it and cook it down into sauce and you're good to go and just throw it in a can. Whereas other things, it's more of like a recipe, you have more ingredients. But yeah, I haven't been doing too much canning, but I do have leftovers from last year. And honestly, we've just been enjoying a lot of stuff fresh. I've been cooking with a lot of tomatoes. We have so many meals that are very tomato heavy, so as Serena from You Can't Eat the Grass would say, we just become tomato-based life forms in the summer. Every meal has tomatoes. So we've honestly just been enjoying a lot of our tomatoes fresh, and I haven't been preserving that much, but you know what? That's totally okay. We're still enjoying it one way or another, and it's nice to enjoy these things while they're in season. So yeah, just trying not to stress out too much about it and just doing it when we really do have excess. I'm just trying to be a little bit more laid back about it this year. All right, we're up to 2 pounds now. I'm pretty excited to try this recipe. To be honest, I don't know how much we're gonna like it, which sounds kind of dumb because it's like, why are you making this? But because the recipe has a lot of balsamic vinegar in it, like that is a main part of the flavor profile, I'm just a little bit unsure about how much we will like it. Aaron really doesn't like vinegar. He especially does not like balsamic vinegar. So this is going to be interesting to have him try it. I feel like he's gonna hear that it has balsamic vinegar and already be like, gross, I don't want that. But I think because it has a lot of sugar, that will kind of offset it, and also the onions, of course. But I'm still making this recipe because I think objectively it's a very delicious recipe, even though Aaron's not really into vinegar and I'm not really into like very sweet things. I think that it's going to be something that objectively other people would like, even if we don't like it. And the plan is we're obviously going to try it out and see if we like it. And if we do, then that's great. But if not, I also think that this onion jam will make for really good presents. I'm going to be canning these in half pints, which are like the perfect jar size for gifting. Because then you can make more and then it's not too much for people who maybe don't always know what to do with something that's a little bit more artisanal or like something you would get at a store. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't want to give like a whole pint of something to someone if they might not like it. And I feel like this will be something that's more unique and will be fun to give as presents. I think Aaron's family in particular would really like it because I think they really like sweet things and also vinegary things. So I think these would make for good presents for them. We'll just see like once everything is all done and we try it out. But some of the ideas that I was reading about for how people use this recipe is you can put it on burgers as like a caramelized onion topping. You can also put it on grilled cheeses. That's, I think, one way that we would probably use it a lot if this turns out well. I think some people also said you could put it on like roasts or like meat or I don't know, stuff like that. Maybe pork chops. We don't really eat meat that way, so we probably won't be using it that way, but it sounds like it would be a good way to dress up meat dishes. That's one thing that I've found is really difficult for me to find canning recipes that I like over the years because there are so many things that I read where the recipes are like, this will be good on meat. And we don't really eat meat, so I'm like, okay, well, other than meat, what can I put it on? Things like mint jelly, I don't know, things that are like more unique. Like I feel like everyone's always just like, just put it on like a roast. Okay, my goggles are fogging up so bad right now, and also my forehead is getting so sweaty. So it's getting hard to see, but we have to stay protected. But I feel like it's like hard for me because whenever I look up recipes, I guess this goes for everyone really. Like you have to look at a recipe and even though it says it'll be good on something, you have to think about whether or not you're actually going to make like the main thing it goes with. Because for a lot of this stuff, it's very much like a condiment. You're not going to be eating a whole jar of these caramelized onions and this like onion jam. It's something that's going to go with something else and you just have to think about like, is that something you're actually going to make and does it fit into my diet and my lifestyle? So that's something I think about when thinking about whether or not a canning recipe is worth my time and all the work. Even though I've gotten more comfortable with canning, it definitely is a good amount of work. Like you have to set aside a morning or an afternoon or a whole day to do it. So you want to make sure it's worth it and it's something that you'll actually eat or give away as presents. I think what I really need to do though actually is just invest in a pressure canner. You're kind of limited with water bath canning because you have to can high acid things, and besides tomatoes, like most vegetables are low acid, which means you have to add vinegar. And again, we don't really like vinegary things. And then when you add a lot of vinegar, you usually also have to add a lot of sugar to counteract it. And that's just not like my favorite flavor profile. And like, even if it's okay, I don't want everything to be super sweet and vinegary because again, it's just a condiment. You can't just like eat it by itself. All right, I got another pound of onions I'm putting in. But once you get into pressure canning, you can can all of those low acid vegetables and you can can broths and beans. And these are the things we really use a lot of. So I think it's something that would work really well into our current diet and lifestyle And to be honest, I don't really know why I haven't gotten a pressure canner yet. I think it's really just the space issue. I really hate getting new kitchen tools because all I can think about is the space it's gonna take up in our small house and how I don't have storage for it. So much thought and consideration has to like go through my head before I decide to get a kitchen gadget, because I know I have to physically make space for it and make sure that it can store in our kitchen or in a closet basically year round. But honestly, I just need to do it. I just need to clear some stuff out and get a pressure canner because I think it would be so useful. I also kind of want to get into pressure canning ready-made meals like soups and things. I've seen a lot of people do that, and I think it's such a good idea. Oops. I think it's such a good idea just to have some of those ready-made meals for when you're busy or just don't feel like cooking, and you can put a lot of your homegrown vegetables in it. You can even put meat in it and it's fine for pressure canning. So yeah, that's something I'd really like to get into. But the great thing about homesteading is that there's always new skills to learn. That's one thing that I love so much about this lifestyle, because I'm someone who like always gets into new things, like new hobbies, and if I wasn't constantly like learning something new, I think that would be very sad because that's part of life. So yeah, it would be exciting to pick up a new skill of pressure canning. So if any of you already pressure can, let me know what you like to can. Maybe if you have like a pressure canner that you would recommend that I get, that would be great, because yeah, the more I like talk about and think about this, the more I'm wondering like why I don't just look into one and get one, because it sounds like it would be very good. All right, we are at 4 pounds of onions now. I'm gonna go ahead and add another teaspoon of salt now. All right, so I've just got 2 more pounds of onions to go. All right, so the last 2 cups of onions are going in. Wow, there's so much liquid at the bottom of this pot right now. The onions I already had in there have reduced so much, and now I'm just gonna add in the last teaspoon of salt. That is a full pot of onions right there. All right, so now I'm gonna chop up some herbs to add in. This is some thyme and rosemary from the garden that I picked earlier. The stems of these herbs will also go into my broth bag. Those will add really nice flavor. I'm using mostly thyme here because that's what I have a lot of, and I also just love the flavor of thyme with caramelized onions. It is so good. To pick the leaves off of thyme, you can run against the grain like that, but towards the tip I also like to go with the grain of the thyme. I also like to do that when you have thyme that has like multiple stems like this. If you go along the stem completely down, you're just gonna get this whole stem, and then you could go and like strip that individually, but sometimes I find it easier to just go with the grain because then it strips the small stem and the big stem at the same time. The original recipe also says you can use summer savory, which I actually am growing in the garden this year, but it's flowering right now, which means that it's not producing a lot of leaves. So I just decided to go with the thyme and rosemary, but I think that's going to be a really good flavor for this. So I need 3 tablespoons total. Let me get some of this rosemary. That's probably like 2 tablespoons, so I think I could use a little more. What a good smell. That is a huge handful of herbs right there. The recipe says to add the herbs at the end, but I'm just going to go ahead and add them now so that they have plenty of time to infuse. This looks so good already. I forgot I'm still wearing my onion goggles, so I can take these off now. And let's see. Yeah, I've got a line up here and marks on my face. This always happens every time I wear those goggles when I'm cutting onions or making soap. And the lines last for so long too. Sometimes I'll wear the goggles and 2 hours will pass and I'll have forgotten that I was wearing them earlier. And then Erin will see me and he'll ask me if I was cutting onions. And I just have this moment of confusion where I'm like, how did you know? But it's because the line on my face just stays for hours and hours. But you know what? It's worth it because I didn't cry at all while cutting those 6 pounds of onions, which is a miracle because even now just cleaning up the scraps, I can like kind of feel it activating. And I'm not even cutting the onions now. It's just like all the residual fumes and it's still very strong. Alright, so I've mostly cleaned up my mess and I'm going to prep some of the other ingredients that are going to go in a little bit. So first off, I have the balsamic vinegar. Hopefully this is a good one. We don't really eat balsamic vinegar, so I don't usually buy it. So I don't know what brands are good and which ones aren't, but we're going to go with this one. And I'm going to need 2 1/4 cups. Which might be this whole bottle. Yeah, that's pretty much the whole bottle, so that is perfect. Good thing I did not plan on doubling the batch, which I almost did. That's great. Now I don't have like this leftover bottle left in my pantry that I'm never gonna use. It smells pretty good. It smells like vinegar, but like a red wine. Okay, maybe this is gonna be really delicious. Maybe even Erin will eat it. All right, so I've got the vinegar and then I'm gonna need a lot of sugar and we're gonna do 2 1/4 cups of that as well. All right, so I'm gonna set the vinegar and sugar aside for now. And I think this has to keep cooking for a little while longer before I add in the sugar and vinegar. I think we want it to get to like starting to get golden. So it's gonna have to cook out a lot of the moisture that's in there right now. You can see there's a lot of liquid in there. So once that liquid has evaporated out, these onions cook down, then they'll start getting golden. I can see like a little bit of color forming at the bottom here. You see there's like some golden color, probably from like the earlier onions. But I think this is gonna take a little while longer. And then once we add the sugar and vinegar, that's also going to cook for quite a while. I think it needs to cook for like 45 minutes to reduce and like get really syrupy. So we've got a little bit of downtime right now. All right, so while we wait, I'm gonna clean off this table because I have some soap that I just made yesterday that I want to cut into. I'm so excited to cut into it. I took it out of the mold and the side of the soap looks so cool. And I'm really excited to see what it looks like on the inside. So we want a nice clean surface. Let's cut open our soap. All right, so here is a look at the soap just out of the mold in its low form. Is that not the coolest thing ever? It kind of looks like marble or granite. And honestly, I'm just so thrilled with how this came out. I thought it was gonna come out a little differently. I didn't know the rolls were gonna come out like this, but I think it's so cool. I've just been staring at it and just waiting to cut it open, but I wanted to do it on camera so I could show you and we can reveal the inside together. All right, so let me get this in my soap cutter. The bottom looks so cool. That is so cool. All right, hold on, I need to take a picture of this. Okay, I couldn't really get a good picture, so this is gonna have to be my documentation for how this soap loaf looks. Alright, I just cut off a little bit of the end just to give myself a nice straight piece to work with, and that's what it looks like, the first piece. There's a lot more dark areas in the soap than I thought there would be, but I do think it looks really cool. Interesting. So this is one side of the soap, but then the other side looks very different. It's like much more muted, less of the darker gray, or it's like just like more mixed in with the white. But this side I think looks really cool. All right, let's keep cutting. Actually, I'm gonna cut a few small pieces for soap samples before I get further in, so I don't forget. Ooh, that's pretty cool. It kind of reminds me of like a latte or something. Just like with the swirls, it reminds me of like the foamed or steamed milk. And you kind of have those like more brown colors that remind me of like a caramel coffee or something like that. This is looking really interesting. The fun thing about making soap is you like pour the whole thing into your mold and you have to wait a day until you unmold it and cut into it to see what the inside looks like and to see how your design came out. And this is definitely the most fun process when you get to like cut into it. I'm just gonna do one more for samples and then we can start cutting the full-size bars again. Really interesting. Those swirls came out really cool. I don't know if you guys can hear, but the caramelized onions are bubbling away furiously. They are so loud, and there's so much liquid in here. But it's also just making like the best smell while I cut this soap as well, which also smells really good. There's a lot of smells going on in here. So this is actually a new soap that I was trying out a new like design and fragrance, but I do really like how it came out. So I will probably be adding this to the shop once it's cured, which will be in a month. Honestly, the design came out so much cooler than I could have hoped for. I thought it was going to be like really subtle swirls, but the way these swirls came out is so cool. So the scent is mostly cedarwood essential oils. The whole thing is scented with essential oils, but it's mostly cedarwood. And then I also added a little bit of rosemary and lavender. So my thought with this was to be, I guess, like a slightly more masculine scent, but I also just really love the smell of cedar as well. And then the rosemary and lavender just add a little bit more complexity to it. But I think the scent is really nice. It's like it's herbal without being floral. So yeah, this one definitely like exceeded my expectations. But now my question is, since the design came out a little differently than I thought it would, I'm not really sure what to name this soap. So if you have any ideas based on this design and like the colors and also the scent of cedarwood, rosemary, and lavender, please leave them in the comments. And who knows, maybe we will name a soap after one of your suggestions. That would be pretty cool. Oh, and by the way, the colors that I have in here to like get the different colors for the swirl. So I have different clays in like all the different colors, but mostly to get this like kind of brownish mocha color or caramel color, I used matcha powder, which I think is really fun. And it actually makes it more of like a brown rather than you'd think it would be a green, because matcha is very green, but in soap it does turn brown, which is what I wanted. And then for the black swirls, I have the matcha and also some activated charcoal. And I just did a little bit of that to get more of like a more gray color, just so that I could have different values in there for the swirl. I think the colors work together really well. I'm actually really surprised at how it looks inside with the way the swirls were, because when I unmolded the loaf, on the side it looked very marbly, like lots of like long streaks of color. So it would have been really cool if like the long streaks of color were in each bar, but since I'm like cutting in the middle of where those streaks were, if that makes sense, you're getting more of like a cross section of it. So it's a little different from what I thought, because I just like wasn't really thinking of the way I would cut this and how it would affect it, but I still really like it. But I'm glad I was able to do this process on camera so I could show you like what the sides and the bottom of the soap looks like, because I think it looked so cool. Maybe that's something that I'll play with in the future, if I could like cut my bars in a way so that I can maintain a lot of that like marbling, because that would be such a cool design element. But for now, I'm very happy with how these ones came out. Ooh, this one has a lot of like the caramel color. It looks so good. Ooh, look at this last bar. It has so much of like it looks almost like an animal print. Like a leopard? Tiger? Not a tiger, maybe a leopard. Maybe a tiger. I don't know. What animal does this remind you of? Alright, so here are the finished bars. So happy with these. They came out so cool. And yeah, I can't wait to add them to the shop. They should be available September 11th. Here's another update on the onions. There's even more liquid than before, but they're definitely getting more of like a golden color. I don't know if you can see it on camera. They still look pretty white on camera, but they look more golden to me. So maybe another 5 to 10 minutes and then we can add in the other ingredients. Alright, it is later in the day now. All of my cans have come out of the canner and they've all cooled off. And I ended up with 9 half pints. And I think all of my jars have sealed, which is great. And I have just a little bit in this jar that I'm going to try out right now. The flavor might be a little bit strong, freshly out of the jar, because usually with things that have a lot of vinegar, they are better after a few days to a week, so that vinegar can kind of like tame itself a little bit. So it smells really good though. It does smell like caramelized onions, but just with a little bit of vinegar. So the one that I just stuck in the fridge that hasn't been processed is a little bit liquidy, but it looks like the ones that have gone through the water bath canning process, they're a little bit thicker. Like you can see that one is still pretty thick, whereas the one that was in the fridge is pretty liquidy. So maybe something with the processing helps it to set up a little bit more. And here's a close-up at what it looks like. So it's definitely not supposed to be like fully set like a jam or jelly would be. So there's no pectin in there, but the sugar does help thicken it. So I'm just gonna try it straight. Hopefully it's not too strong. That's really good. It's actually not too vinegary for being like freshly out and hasn't been sitting out too much. And it's sweet, but not like overly sweet either. I think that's gonna be really good once it's had time to like sit for a few weeks. It's really delicious. I definitely would put this on grilled cheeses, burgers. I think it would also be good on some crackers with like some cream cheese or like a charcuterie board, or if you were doing girl dinner, this would be a great addition. So I think this new canning project was definitely a success. I would do it again. The only thing is while it was boiling down, it did boil down for a long time and the vinegar smell was pretty strong. I think it took like an hour to boil and I had to open the windows because the vinegar smell was pretty strong. So maybe better to do on a day when you could open up the windows. But other than that, I think this came out really great. So yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video. Thank you for watching and I'll see you again in the next one.
I don't want it.
Here we go, taste test.
You buy real crackers. Why did they all do this?
Alright, Aaron's gonna try out the onion jam. I think it's been about a week since I made it, so it should be more like tamed. It's the butter.
Oh, it
yeah.
is? Okay, I was gonna say it's...
Yeah, it's not mold, it's just the butter solidifies.
You sure about that?
Yeah. That's all you're gonna have?
I'm gonna try and get more onion than go.
It looks like a slug.
You're really making it appetite. I have to do the sniff test first. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's pretty good, right?
Very good.
You like it? What would you put it on?
Maybe like a toast?
A toast? What do you mean a toast?
I don't know. What do you eat with it?
Just put it on bread?
What do you eat with it?
Like on hamburgers, grilled cheese, hot dogs, like anything like that?
Oh, there's a sharpness at the end to it.
Yeah, the vinegar, right?
I think so.
You just ate a plain cracker, that's not even...
I gotta get the vinegar out of my mouth.
Here, make me one. Okay, so wait, what's your verdict though? Would you eat it?
It depends on the context. I don't want a plain by itself.
Yeah, but on stuff.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. The verdict is maybe.